All right. So this is my second interview on this podcast. Michael's guest at my home. I'm really happy to have Adam with me today.
Thanks, Michael. Really nice to be here.
So by the way, this setup is totally staged. My apartment do not look like this. So yeah. You know that.
Yeah, but everything for the show, right?
Yes, sir. And since Adam is realized that he doesn't need any alcohol, we have bought a non-alcoholic red wine.
Yeah.
Maybe we will exchange that with water. Depends on how it tastes.
Let's see, it's going to be interesting. I'm on the search for a really good non-alcoholic wine, so maybe
Right.
This is the one.
Maybe. It's actually... it contains 27 grams of sugar per liter. So
All
it's
right.
quite sweet. Anyway, cheers. Nice to have you here.
Cheers. Thanks.
Yeah. Comment?
Doesn't really taste like wine, but it could have been worse.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, Adam, we've been known each other for a few years now.
Yeah, actually, I did my first public speaking session at Foo Cafe many years ago. So I have very fond memories of both Foo Cafe and you, of course, that invited me to do that.
Yeah, of course. That's what Foo Cafe is about, is to encourage people to come and talk about their passion. And you had a passion already back then. You had a very different background as a developer and also study some psychology, was it?
Yeah, that's right. So I'm actually an electrical engineer from the beginning.
Yeah.
But I've been working as a software developer through all those years. And a long time ago, maybe 15 years ago, I started to study psychology at the university too. So I have my second degree in psychology. And since that date, I've been more or less trying to mix those two disciplines to put my psychological perspective on top of my technical background.
That's super interesting. And you find your own way to do that back in the days now? Was it 6-7 years ago or something like that?
Yeah, something like that, maybe a little bit more. So the thing was that I used to be a software consultant in my previous life. And I faced a bunch of different challenges. One of them was always that I had to communicate with non-technical stakeholders around something as deeply technical as source code. And I found that incredibly hard to do. So I picked some ideas out of my psychology courses. In particular, I took some inspiration from the field of forensic psychology. You know, different techniques for how can you track a serial killer and how can you kind of catch them. So I tried to apply the same techniques to software, and it was quite successful. At least I found it very useful. So I kind of decided, let's do something around this. I started to talk about it.
So did you start to do it with your own code or the code you were working on? Or was that the beginning? Or
Yeah, that was the beginning. So as a consultant, I was often hired as some kind of tech lead or software architect, something like that. And so I was more or less responsible for making sure we could do an effective delivery from a technical perspective. And I kind of started to use these techniques to do my own job a little bit better. I never meant to write a book about it. I never meant to build a commercial tool around it. So I did it for my own. And then I simply noticed that other people found it useful. So that's when I started to talk about it and write about it. That's the short story, at least.
that's the yeah. So what did your clients said at that time?
So they appreciated. So I actually started, I never thought that this would be something for development teams. I started to think that this is something I can use as a communication tool to speak with my product owners, with my business managers, those kind of people who might know a bit about technology, but they are not really developers themselves. And they appreciate it because suddenly they could kind of peek into that IT, that black box that is IT, right? They could suddenly see the source code visualized, and they can figure out how healthy is that code actually, and the decisions I make, how do they impact our development efforts going forward. So they kind of appreciate it. And then I figured out that these techniques, they're actually quite useful for the development teams too. My peers started to get interested. So I was very fortunate to work with some very skilled software testers, for example.
Yeah.
And we worked with some kind of sprints and iterations, doing 2-week sprints. And at the end of each sprint, the testing team, they kind of had a couple of days where they can do some exploratory testing. So I started to use some of these techniques that I had developed to direct their testing efforts, and they found it beneficial. So that's how I kind of started, with small islands, and then I scaled it to different kinds of users over the years.
Great. So isn't it like when you're a developer, software developer, it's super important how you communicate with your project manager or product manager, or so what you are doing and what you're about to do and why you should do it. Isn't that one of the most important skill you need to have as a developer to build trust?
Yeah.
To your teammates, to your managers.
Yeah, I absolutely agree on that. It's also, I think, one of the most challenging skills to build, because it's so incredibly hard. And I think the main challenges I've seen is that we as developers, we tend to use a different vocabulary. We have a different set of words that we use to describe our work. And more business-oriented people, they talk about something completely different. Yeah. And there is some kind of communication gap between us. And that's what I've been working on, spending most of my time on over the past 10 years to try to kind of fill that gap. Yeah.
And also, I remember when I was working in a big team of developers, my colleagues who were able to express the needs, there seems to be better developers than people that was not as good in expressing themselves. Even though they were probably doing the same type of code and they were equally as good developers, but the ones that were able to talk about it in a way that other understood it, they raised in salary and also in career and getting better jobs. And the ones that wasn't that good in communication, they were stuck as a regular developer, so to say.
And that's a really interesting observation. So I kind of noticed the same pattern.
Yeah.
So these days I happen to be a manager myself. I have no idea how that happened. I never planned for it, but that's what happens when you start your own company, I guess.
Yeah, something went wrong.
Yeah, something definitely went wrong. But I'm the kind of manager who still writes code.
Yeah.
So I'm writing code almost every day. And what I kind of noticed is that I simply didn't have as much time as I used to have to develop my coding skills. I used to read tons of books around that. I used to practice a lot and do my open source projects. And I simply had to cut down on that. But what I noticed is that I think I'm a better developer now than I used to be. And that's because I started to understand the business side of code. And I think that's what communication is about as well. That once we understand where the other person comes from, then it's so much easier to share a vocabulary and to communicate with each other. And it's something that I'm very confident also makes us better as developers once we understand the domain.
Yeah.
Because that's where we can do the real optimizations. That's where we can do the things that really, really make a difference.
Isn't it hard when you're a consultant and having a good understanding of the domain you're working in?
It is very challenging, but I also think it's the most important thing. So I'm a bit surprised about that, because I can remember as a consultant part of my onboarding when I joined a company was always focused around the technical activities. Yeah. Like, here's the source code, this is how the thing work. But I think an even better start would be to train every single developer as a user, as an end user.
Yeah.
that's a very simple way to build a high-level understanding of the domain, and it's going to be beneficial to everyone on the project.
Yeah, IKEA had a brilliant way of treating their employees earlier. All employees, and you're working in the office, you had to do 1 week in the operations in a store or a warehouse or somewhere to understand, to get a very good understanding of how it works.
Yeah.
And I thought it was brilliant, but after a few years they dropped it out. So I think it's important to understand the domain you're working in, even as a developer.
It is, and it can of course be more or less challenging. I'm very fortunate these days because I work with tools for developers.
Yeah.
So we are naturally the end users ourselves, right? When we already have a good understanding of the domain, it's something that simplifies the task tremendously.
Yeah.
And I think there's a big win to a business too, because first of all, there's so many things you don't have to communicate around. There are so many meetings you no longer need to have once everyone has a certain level of domain expertise. If you think about something like requirements, for example,
Yep.
or user stories, right? If we already understand why we're building that thing, it's going to be much easier. And that's also where we see opportunities to optimize, because suddenly we understand that, all right, we never even need to write that code because the user never wants to do that, right? So I think that's it's an opportunity to save lots of time and money by educating people as domain experts.
And yet, not many companies are doing that.
Just had to taste the wine once again now that you bought it.
Yeah, so fucking expensive wine. It's it cost me almost €7. So, yeah.
But
so
I appreciate it.
69 SEK. Yeah. You appreciate it?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah, good, okay. Little bit, it tastes more than water.
Yeah. No, but I do think I think you're onto something very interesting. If this is the case, that we can benefit from domain expertise, why aren't the companies actually educating everyone as a user? And I don't know the answer, but I have this suspicion that there are so many companies out there, they kind of view developers that the moment we're not sitting in front of our keyboards and typing away, we're not working. And I think it's a mistake. I think it's a very low-hanging fruit to simply use the knowledge. You probably already have it in-house. How are people using this?
Yeah.
Most likely you have customer success people or sales people that know that stuff.
So when you started up with this, your idea of mixing those two domains as engineer and psychology, and you did it for your own purpose, and did people thought you were an idiot or? So you can't mix this shit up. You have to just write code and just.
Yeah, so
maybe did you get some people that said, "What are you doing, Adam? Are you?"
Yeah, maybe they thought I'm an idiot, but they were kind enough not to tell me at least. So
yeah, right. We are in Sweden. We are polite.
Yeah, we are.
We are not telling people they are idiots.
Yeah.
No, maybe it was good for you.
I think so, but I was very convinced. So my impression was that people were interested in it.
Yeah.
Because the reason I started to study psychology at all was because at that time I had already been working 10 years in the software industry, been part of a bunch of large-scale product development efforts, and my observation was that most of them, they tended to fail, and they tend to fail miserably.
Yeah.
With cost overruns, missed deadlines and whatnot. And I kind of thought, why is it so hard to develop good software? And I kind of knew that I won't find the answer within the software industry, because then we would already been doing it. So that was why I decided to look elsewhere, to look into psychology, because psychology is about how we think, reason, and solve problems, and how we work together.
Yeah.
So when I tell people that story, they usually find it interesting, and they always want to know what I figured out. So it's a good opener for conversation.
Yeah. So, was it a big step for you to go from consultancy line of work to creating your own company? I mean, so, many people think that it's a huge step to take, because being employed in a consultancy company is quite, yeah, you know what you have, and money comes in every month, and it's hunky-dory life.
It's very comfortable.
Yeah.
It is. And I was earning pretty well as a consultant too, right? And I have to tell you that the timing couldn't have been worse to start my own company, because the reason I did it at all was that I had been working with these techniques. How do you make sense of a large code base?
Yeah.
I've been working with them for a couple of years, and I've written my first book about it, Your Code is a Crime Scene. And when that book came out, I kind of realized that I've really just scratched the surface of what's possible. I want to dig into this full time. And the only way of doing that was to start my own company. So I kind of knew that I need to do it. I'm going to regret it the rest of my life if I don't do it.
Yeah.
So I really had no choice. But the timing was horrible, because we had just bought a house.
Yeah.
My son was born 6 months earlier.
Yeah.
Which means my wife was at home with him. And I knew that if I start my own company, I have to cut my salary in half.
Yeah.
But I decided I had to do it. I didn't really have a choice. So I went ahead, and yes, it was really scary.
And your wife, she was supporting you?
She was supporting me a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it wouldn't have been possible without her doing all that.
No, that's important to have that support, yeah.
Yeah, and it's also scary, because it also means that she somehow believes in me, right? So now I have to deliver on that promise. So.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I haven't regretted it, but it was very stressful, and it still is occasionally.
Yeah.
But I think it went well in the end.
Yeah.
Been doing that for 5.5 years now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember it's almost like yesterday. You were working in this consultancy company, and you have these ideas, and yeah, and I mean, you didn't look like a person that was an entrepreneur. Because normally entrepreneurs takes more space than you do. You're a bit more laid back and not as outspoken as many entrepreneurs are. And
No.
yeah, from my perspective, this creates credibility. That's what it creates. When I saw you already from the beginning, even though you were super nervous before the
Yeah.
first talk at Folk Cafe, but it was you had your passion, and that's super important. And you believed in this stupid idea, which became very successful, and it was actually really nice to see that. It was. So you have grown your company now from. How many are you today?
Oh, we are growing quite rapidly. So CodeScene, we started in 2015, and now we are 14 people. I think we're going to be 16 next month.
Wow.
So we're growing quite rapidly.
Yeah.
But it took a number of years, and we did it differently, because the traditional way of starting a product company is, of course, that you take in some kind of angel investment or something like that, a small sum of money, and then you try to build a proof of concept or an MVP, and then you take in some venture capital. And we decided not to do that. So instead, we tried to bootstrap the company by doing services, which basically meant that I took the evolving product, which wasn't good enough to sell yet, and then went to different organizations, analyzed their code, helped them prioritize the technical depth, and used the revenue from that to kind of fund the future product development.
Yeah.
And then we've made a switch around 2018, 2019, where we said, now the product is good enough, so let's turn down the services a bit and focus on selling the product instead.
Right.
So that was the big shift. And that's where I wanted to get to. I never thought it would take 3 years. I'm an optimist like all developers.
Yeah.
Thought 6 months, tops.
Yeah. That's great. So your software is analyzing code and pinpoints weaknesses in the code. Is that easy explain? Did I get it right, or?
Yeah, in a way you get it right, but I like to think that so CodeScene to me it's not so much a code analysis tool. It's more a behavioral analysis tool. So we are analyzing code. We are classifying code as problematic, technical debt, and whatnot. But most of the emphasis in CodeScene is on the human side, the behavior of the organization. How do we as developers interact with the code we're building? And that's where I find that the most interesting information is. Because if we know our patterns as developers, how we kind of move around in the code base, then we can use that information to prioritize technical problems based on the likely impact. And we can also start to measure things that we really haven't been able to measure before, like teamwork, for example.
Yeah.
How well does your architecture hold up for your different development teams? Can they work fairly independently, or will they constantly clash in somewhere in the code?
Yeah.
And there's so much you can do with that.
But can't it also be a problem where the manager has a better view on what the developers are doing, so it could be used in a way that hey, these developers are really, really bad, so we have to let him go, or this developer is really super good, so we give him a raise, or things like that. Is that a...
I see what you mean, and it could have been an issue, but I decided from day one to not go down that path. And I've actually been asked a number of times over the past years if I could use CodeScene to kind of go in and rank all the developers in an organization or something like that.
Yeah.
And the answer is no, you cannot do that, because we never built that into CodeScene deliberately. Because I'm very convinced that it's the wrong thing to do. Because what's going to happen the moment you start to evaluate individuals is that as humans, we're going to optimize for what we're being measured on.
Yeah.
So if I'm evaluated on something like how many commits do I do a day,
Yeah.
I'm going to make more commits.
Yeah.
Each commit will carry less meaning, but I'm going to make more of them.
Yeah.
If I'm evaluated on the quality of the code I contribute, what I'm going to do is I'm going to avoid any tricky parts of the code base, right? Focus on the easy stuff so I get it right.
Yeah.
And what's even worse is that I'm convinced that the moment you start to evaluate individuals, you're going to destroy the team dynamics. Because now you come and ask me for help. How does this thing work? And sorry, I don't have time to help you. I'm busy making commits here. Yeah. So I think it's really dangerous. I don't think people want to do that.
So you don't have that those metrics in your software.
I mean, you could. We make it very hard to do something like that, and we actively discourage against it. You have the different pieces, so in theory you can start to rank people, but it would be the absolutely wrong thing to do.
Yeah.
And CodeScene makes it as hard as possible to evaluate individuals. And actually, it's not a common issue. It's very rare that people think about those use cases, but it happens. So in my latest book, I actually included a whole chapter on why you don't want to do stuff like that, and try to cover and explain that area.
Yeah.
Because I think it harms the organization.
Of course, yeah. But I heard there were some criticism. I heard it a few years ago that that's why I asked you this question. So maybe those people just had misunderstood what actually the CodeScene is doing.
Yeah, they most likely had. So my experience is that, and I do talk to a lot of different users.
Yeah.
It's very, very rare that you meet a developer who kind of perceive CodeScene as a threat. Rather, what they say is that this is great. Now I finally can explain to my manager why I need more time to refactor this thing, or why we need to do X.
Yeah.
And every time I hear something like that, it makes me really happy, because that's the purpose of CodeScene. It's a communication tool. It's not a code analysis tool. It's there to facilitate and simplify your communication. So it hasn't really been an issue, fortunately. But I was having the same concerns when I started up. I was worried that people would think that this is something you use to evaluate individuals. But it was never the purpose, and we deliberately advise against it and make it as hard as possible to do the wrong thing and as easy as possible to do the right thing.
Yeah. All right. So, what's the next step then? Are you done now? Is selling your company and starting a new one, or you have more challenges in with CodeScene?
I'm very, very far from done.
All right.
Yeah. So just like I said earlier, that 5 years ago I felt I really just scratched the surface, and I'm feeling the same thing now. Because the more I learn, the more opportunities I see. And I'm not in this business for money. That's not really what I care about here. What I care about is to kind of make our life as developers a little bit easier and a little bit happier. And I'm also mostly driven by curiosity. I'm really curious. How does this thing we call software, how does it actually behave? What actually happens to a software product over time? So that was what drives me, and I'm pretty sure I'm going to keep myself occupied with that over the next 5 years as well.
Yeah. So, some people makes fun of developers because nowadays is that there is no developers. The only thing you need to do is just go to Stack Overflow and make a search and then copy paste, and then you're done. So real developers are not that common anymore. To be is that something you see as well, or
No.
does your tool help people like just copy and paste from Stack Overflow?
Yeah, so I might have copy-pasted from Stack Overflow myself occasionally. And I actually don't think it's wrong to do that. What I do see is that I'm fortunate to meet lots of people.
Yep.
Maybe not during COVID times, but otherwise, right?
Yep.
And I see so many skilled developers out there. Many people who really, really care about what they do. And I think a person like that is invaluable to a business.
Yeah.
And what I like to do with everything I do with my books and with CodeScene is to help all those people kind of help themselves. Because I'm very convinced that a tool like CodeScene or behavioral code analysis, it doesn't really replace anything. What it does is that it helps us use our existing expertise and experience in a better way. So that's why I think we need the kind of tooling. So I'm using these techniques myself on a daily basis, and it definitely helps me. To me, it never stops to fascinate me how quick I can pick up a code base and then within minutes just know where the weak spots are, where the problematic areas are, where the good parts are. It's really fascinating. So, not sure if I answered your question. I answered something, right?
Yeah. You don't have to answer my questions. Just, so, what's the next step then?
So the next step now is that for my business, we actually just took in our first round of venture capital just before Christmas. So we've been kind of building a product. We have proven that we can sell it. We have seen that the users are excited about what we're building.
Yep.
We're scaling it up. But we have basically been too few people working on it. So we decided now it's the time to scale it up. Now we know how it works. We know how to market it, how to sell it, how to build it. So it's a very good time. So we actually closed our first round of venture capital, and now we're going to use that to kind of make an even better CodeScene. So that's the plan over the next years.
Right. So your company is mostly developers, or?
Yeah, developers are definitely majority.
Yeah.
And then we have, of course, we need sales and marketing.
Yeah.
as well. And that's the thing that's been that was hard for me when I started. I didn't have any prior sales experience or marketing experience, and it's a very different set of expertise that I think are very hard to combine with the work I do as a developer. So I'm really happy to have skilled colleagues that master those areas now.
Mm.
I'm happy that I don't have to do it myself.
So he said, where is your biggest market? Is it...
So I think it's pretty even now between Europe and the US. So we have definitely grown most rapidly in the US over the past year.
All right.
Yeah, which is very interesting. It's also challenging with the time zone. So we actually hired our first person in the US now.
All right.
So we can manage that.
Mm. Is there any specific industries you're more tend to have more customers in, or
No, actually not. So I remember when talking to all those investors, they asked me the same thing: which industry segment are your customers? And they are across all different kinds of industries. We work with health tech companies, we work with finance companies, it's automobile, it's really everything. And I think the reason is that as soon as you have software, which virtually every company has, then you're in our target audience.
And is it the size of code base that is the driver of your software? If your code base is on 5,000 lines of code or 500,000 lines of code?
Yeah, I mean, of course it matters, but I actually think the size of the organization is an even better number, because it's not so much about many lines of code you have, it's about how many people you are. Because the more people you are, the harder it is to have a shared understanding of what the thing looks like.
Isn't it the same thing?
No,
it's not. If you have loads of people working on a software, there is also loads of number of lines of code.
I thought so myself for a long time, and it proves not to be true in general. I've been actually surprised by how much it varies. So I've seen code bases that are really big, like 2-3 million lines of code, and are maintained by just a couple of people. So I think it depends a little bit on in which life cycle phase you are with your product. So if you're having something like a stable legacy system where you do mostly bug fixes, then you're typically a very small team in a very large code base.
Yeah.
And no one really knows how it works. And if you're doing greenfield development, then it could be anything. It could be very often organizations are kind of over-dimensioned. So it might be actually way too many people for the amount of code you're building and maintaining. So I was very surprised by how widely that varies. I didn't see a strong correlation, and I was expecting that, just like you did.
All right. Interesting. So, is there a critical number of in a development team when you actually need support? The kind of support you are offering?
I think there is. So I think that these techniques, they are useful to all development teams. But if you're just like 3 people, it's going to be small enough you can just talk to each other. It's going to be very easy to have a shared situational awareness. So I think the tipping point is around 12, 15 persons. Beyond that, you definitely need some kind of support. But before that, you could most likely manage. But we're still we are 14 people now in our company. Not all of us are developers, and we still benefit from CodeScene.
Yeah.
But not in the same way. I definitely think the value add increases with the size of the organization. Then you can look at really large projects. So I think the largest code base I ever analyzed was 120 million lines of code.
Wow.
Yeah. So that's pretty big. And they were, of course, thousands of developers on that across all continents virtually. And at that scale, I mean, it's impossible for an individual to keep it in their head. And even if they somehow could, that information would be outdated very quickly, because code base at that scale is a moving target. It changes rapidly all the time. So I like to think that at that point you really need something like CodeScene.
Is there a number of is there a limit of number of lines of code that CodeScene could handle, or?
There probably is, but I haven't found it yet. So the record is 120 million lines of code. It might be more about how much history do you have.
Yeah.
Because that's from a runtime performance perspective, that's one of the things that has a huge impact on our analysis times and things like that. So the project with the richest history that I've analyzed is most likely the Linux kernel, which has like 15 years of history in Git.
Yeah.
And is developed by roughly 15,000, 16,000 individuals. And that's what I use for a lot of our performance measures. It's a really, really good testing application.
Yeah.
And a cool code base too, of course.
Mm. Yeah. Right. Mm. Oh. So interesting. So what about services? Are you doing any services anymore, or you said that was the biggest? When you started the company, that was the biggest thing you did. Was
yeah, that's right.
Isn't it also important to be out there and meet new clients and actually talk to them directly to understand new benefits, new features you could build into your product?
It is. It's one of the. I think that to start doing services and then switch to being a product companies was very challenging, of course.
Yeah.
But I'm very happy we did that because it definitely helped getting a good product market fit.
Yeah.
Because we are users ourselves, we kind of notice what's hard for us. It's going to be hard for a customer too.
Yeah.
So it really helped. And these days we're not doing many services. We are trying to stay in very close touch with our main users, of course.
Yeah.
So we do regular workshops for them and stuff like that, which I really enjoy. I think that's one of the more fun parts of the job.
Yeah.
But traditional services like I used to do a couple of years ago, I still do them occasionally, but it's very limited. And the only reason I do it occasionally is because it's kind of it's like a little bit like an education for me.
Yeah.
That I get to be the user. I actually get to experience this feeling of getting to completely unfamiliar code base and try to make sense of it. And it's something I'm happy to do because I often spot new product features that way.
Mm.
So pretty soon if you do that, you kind of notice that, I have this piece of information, I have this. If I have this third piece, then I could answer this question.
Yeah.
And then you start to build it. So it's something that's that definitely helps the product roadmap. But I don't do that much. I mean, like one service every second month or something like that.
Yeah. But you think it's important anyway to do it once in a while?
Yeah, I definitely think so. The difference now is I don't have to do it to pay my salary anymore. I'm doing it because I want to.
Yeah.
So that's the big difference.
It's a luxury.
It is. I'm actually enjoying it.
Yeah.
It's pretty fun.
Yeah. So I'm super happy that you were able to come to my couch and have this talk.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
So our second podcast recording. So I would like to say thank you, Adam. Unless you have something to add to this.
No, I think we covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And thanks a lot for inviting me. And wish you all the best with the podcast. It's a pretty cool concept.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to follow you there as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. And thank you. I'll see you next week. Okay. Bye.
Thanks.
Okej.
Bra.
Men
Tror du det blev något vettigt?
Ja, det blev vettigt. Absolut. Det blev skitbra.